She just wanted a birthday gift. What she got was humiliation on a Paris sidewalk. When Keanu Reeves' mother was turned away from a luxury store for not looking rich enough, she stayed silent. But one phone call to her son triggered a quiet storm, and what he did next would shock the fashion world forever. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Rain clouds drifted low over the gray Paris skyline as Patricia Taylor stepped lightly onto Avenue Montaigne. The breeze carried the scent of wet cobblestone and high-end perfume drifting from nearby boutiques. Her black trench coat clung to her arms, and her soft gray curls fluttered around her face. She looked up at the elegant gold signage of the store she had dreamed about for years. The boutique sparkled with chandeliers inside. Its windows displayed silk scarves, suede gloves, and handbags worth more than her first car. But she wasn't here for extravagance. It was her 79th birthday. Patricia had spent a lifetime giving, raising children, surviving heartbreak, standing tall through years of financial uncertainty. She had never spoiled herself. But today, she had saved enough for something simple. Just one meaningful thing from this city she loved. A birthday memory. Maybe a scarf. Or a brooch. Nothing flashy, just a symbol. She adjusted her worn handbag and smoothed her sensible skirt. Her shoes were polished but old. Her blouse was clean, though faintly wrinkled from the suitcase. She had dressed modestly, respectfully, but not glamorously. She stepped toward the entrance, hopeful. A man in a tailored black coat blocked her path. He wore a name tag that read Christophe. His shoulders were square, his hair slicked back like polished leather. He glanced at her from head to toe, his expression sharpening with quiet disdain. "Bonjour, madame," he said flatly, his accent clipped. "I'm afraid the store is closed for a private event." Patricia blinked, startled. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said politely, looking past him. Inside, customers sipped champagne, laughing, browsing glittering shelves. "I saw people just walk in. I was hoping to just—" "Billy are on the guest list," Christophe interrupted. "Today is for select clients only." She hesitated. "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just wanted to buy something small, a gift for myself." "It's my birthday." Her voice was calm, gentle, but he didn't flinch. His eyes moved to her handbag, her shoes, her simple blouse. Then he stepped fully in front of the door. "Perhaps another shop would be more appropriate for your taste," he said, forcing a tight smile. "Try the souvenir stores along the Seine." Patricia froze. She wasn't a confrontational woman. Never had been. But something stung deeply in those words. Not just the rejection, but the implication that she didn't belong, that her presence alone was a problem. Behind the glass, the boutique sparkled with warm light. Women in designer heels browsed silk. A man in a velvet blazer held up a pair of leather gloves for his wife. Champagne flutes clinked. And Patricia, the mother of one of the most respected men in the world, stood on the sidewalk in the rain, being told she wasn't enough. She drew in a breath. "I understand," she said quietly. "Thank you." Christophe didn't respond. He had already turned away. Patricia stepped back, heels clicking softly on the damp sidewalk. She walked away slowly, her dignity intact, her birthday dreams unraveling with each step. The rain started as a whisper on the pavement, just as Patricia turned the corner. She didn't bother to open her umbrella. Her steps were slow, almost deliberate. There was no rush, no one waiting, just a quiet hotel room and a cup of lukewarm tea. She passed storefronts glowing with golden light. Paris was still beautiful, but it felt colder now, lonelier. As the rain began to fall more steadily, she paused beneath a street lamp. Her reflection caught in the glass of another store window. She looked at herself. Silver curls damp, her scarf darkened by drizzle. She didn't look poor, She didn't look careless. She looked like someone who had lived a long life and worn every season of it with grace. But Christoph hadn't seen that. He had seen her shoes, her age, her absence of labels. A block away, inside the boutique she had tried to enter, Sophia stood frozen behind the counter. The young sales associate had witnessed the entire exchange from her station by the scarves. She had watched the way the doorman spoke to Patricia. Dismissive, calculated. It wasn't the first time she'd seen it happen, but something about this woman had stayed with her. There had been no anger on Patricia's face, just the subtle flicker of disappointment. A kind of sadness that didn't demand attention, but cut deeper for its quietness. Sophia's supervisor, Madame Leclerc, walked briskly past. "Sophia," she said sharply, "these displays are sloppy. Refold the silk wraps. Keep your eyes on your section." "Yes, Madame," Sophia replied automatically, fingers trembling as she reached for the nearest scarf. She wanted to say something, wanted to open the door, offer the woman tea, anything. But she couldn't risk it. Her little brother was in school because of this job. Her mother's medicine came from her paychecks. This wasn't just a job, it was their lifeline. She stood still as the door clicked shut behind another wealthy couple, laughing loudly, dripping with diamonds. Christoph returned to his post with a smug look on his face. "Trying to sneak in looking like a pensioner," he muttered to himself. "They always think they can blend in. As if this is a flea market." Sophia clenched her jaw. She couldn't speak, not here, not yet. Outside, Patricia reached the bridge over the Seine. The rain fell harder now, but she didn't hurry. Her feet hurt, but not from the walk, from something deeper. She had spent decades surviving, rebuilding, raising children on food stamps, sleeping in basements, and now, at 79, with every scar earned and every wrinkle formed from perseverance, she still wasn't enough to step inside a store? She wouldn't cry, not in public, not in Paris. But something in her chest felt heavier with every drop that hit her skin. She wiped her cheeks and whispered to herself, almost like a prayer, "Don't be silly, Patricia. It's just a store. Just a door." Still, the pain lingered. By the time Patricia returned to her hotel room, the rain had soaked through her coat. She peeled it off carefully and draped it over a chair. The quiet hum of the radiator filled the room. She turned on the lamp beside the bed, casting a soft amber glow on the cream-colored wallpaper. She sat down at the small desk near the window and stared at her reflection in the darkened glass. Her silver hair was damp and tousled. Her eyes looked tired but clear. She had always tried to see the beauty in things, even on the hardest days. But tonight, that beauty felt a little farther away. Her hands reached for the teacup she had left on the nightstand that morning. Cold now, forgotten. She opened her phone. 3 missed calls from Kim, a birthday text from her niece, and one from Keanu, short but sweet. "Happy birthday, Mom. Hope Paris is magical. I love you." She didn't reply right away. What could she say? That at 79 she'd been turned away like a stranger in a city she adored? That despite everything she'd built, everything she had overcome, one man in a sharp coat had made her feel invisible? Now, she didn't want to worry him. She set the phone down and reached for her suitcase. Tucked into a side pocket was a small plastic envelope of old photos. Pictures she always carried when she traveled. They grounded her, reminded her who she was. There was Keanu, age 10, standing beside her outside a cramped Toronto apartment. She remembered that day. A landlord had threatened eviction. They'd stood their ground. Keanu had held her hand and whispered, "Don't let him talk to you like that, Mom." She remembered how his jaw clenched, how his eyes looked older than his years. He had always been protective, even before the world knew his name. She touched the photo gently, running her thumb across the faded edges. That little boy had become a man the world adored. For his roles, his humility, his kindness. But to her, he was still the boy who rode the subway with her when they couldn't afford a car. The boy who told her, at 12 years old, "One day, I'll make sure you never feel small again." Her voice caught in her throat as she whispered to the photo, "You've already done more than enough, my love. You don't need to know about this." She closed the envelope and placed it back in the suitcase. Outside the window, the rain had stopped. Paris glistened under the streetlights. The city was alive. But Patricia sat still, quietly absorbing the ache of the day. She thought of Christophe's face, of the way he looked through her, not at her. She wasn't angry, just tired of being reminded in moments like this how easy it is for the world to forget that dignity should never depend on appearances. She turned off the lamp, pulled the covers over her shoulders, and lay quietly. She had no idea that Keanu, her son, would soon hear the story. And when he did, the world would never look at luxury the same way again. The moment the hotel door clicked shut behind her, Patricia let out a long breath. The silence inside was almost too soft, too polite, like the city itself was trying to apologize without saying the words. She slipped off her shoes. Damp and scuffed, they had served her well through the streets of Paris, but now she placed them gently by the door like tired companions. Her coat was soaked through, and the cold had crept up her sleeves and settled in her shoulders. She peeled the fabric off and hung it over the bathroom door to dry. She stood there in the middle of the small suite, wearing just her sweater and skirt, and suddenly felt the weight of her age more than usual. Not because of her body, but because of what had happened. Because no matter how much life she had lived, no matter how much she had endured and grown and given, she was still vulnerable to the sting of being made to feel small. She didn't cry when it happened, not outside, not in front of him. But now, alone, she let herself sit at the edge of the bed, eyes cast down, and her breath hitched once, just once. A tear slipped free and landed silently on the back of her hand. She wiped it away quickly. Then another came. She wasn't ashamed of crying, but she didn't want it to be about this, about one man at one door. Still, the tears came. Not for what was said to her, but for what it brought back. The memories, the buried aches. She stood slowly and walked to the window. The city glowed. Golden lights reflected in the wet streets below. Cars moved like clockwork. People strolled under umbrellas. Shop signs flickered like 1,000 little stars. It was still beautiful, but her heart ached in a way it hadn't in a long time. She leaned her head against the glass, letting the coolness calm her. And quietly she thought of Keanu. Her son had always been her protector. Even when he was just a boy, he had sensed her pain before she ever spoke it aloud. He had carried her struggles like they were his own, and he had promised her, in his own quiet way, that someday life wouldn't hurt her anymore. But she wouldn't tell him about today. Not yet. He was filming, working, busy. She wouldn't burden him with something so trivial. It was just a boutique, just a door. It didn't matter. At least, that's what she tried to believe. She whispered to herself, "You've survived so much worse than a man in a fancy coat, Patricia, let it go." But part of her couldn't. Not yet. She walked slowly to the dresser and opened the top drawer. Tucked between folded scarves and a small travel jewelry case was a soft, worn envelope. Inside were a few photographs she had packed at the last minute, not because she needed them, but because they grounded her. They reminded her of everything that mattered. She sat on the bed and pulled them out one by one. There was Keanu, age 9, standing beside Kim, his arm slung protectively over her shoulder. They were on the steps of a tiny apartment building in Toronto. Their shoes were scuffed, but their smiles were bright. She remembered the day clearly. It had been snowing, and the heating in the apartment barely worked, but they had made snow angels in the backyard, and she had heated soup on a single-burner stove. They hadn't had much, but they'd had love. Always love. She picked up another photo. Keanu again, this time a little older, maybe 12. It was a school function. He was in a borrowed jacket 2 sizes too big, holding a paper certificate he had won for writing an essay about heroes. She remembered asking him afterward who he had written about. He had shrugged and said, "You." She closed her eyes, feeling her throat tighten. Back then, she had worked 3, sometimes 4 jobs. Modeling when it came, typing at night, even teaching part-time when she could find someone to watch the kids. She had gone without meals some nights so her children didn't have to. Rent was always late. Shoes were always too small. But they had made it through, together. And even through all of that, she never once let herself feel less than others. Not because of poverty, not because of circumstance. She had learned to carry herself with pride, even when the world offered no kindness in return. So why now, after all these years, did it sting so much? She knew the answer, though she didn't want to say it aloud. Because it wasn't just about her. It was about something deeper. Something she had believed she had outgrown. The feeling of not belonging. Of being silently measured and dismissed. That boutique had made her feel like the young single mother she once was, the one who was looked at with pity or suspicion, the woman who walked her children through the mall but never into the stores, the mother who skipped her own dental appointments for 10 years to afford violin lessons for Kim. She had fought so hard to leave those feelings behind. She thought she had succeeded. But standing in the rain outside that boutique, hearing that man tell her to try the souvenir shops, something inside her had bent. Not broken, never broken, but bent enough to let the old ache in. Patricia stood up and walked slowly back to the window. The city outside had settled into night. Streetlights reflected off the wet pavement like soft candle flames, and in the distance, the Eiffel Tower sparkled against the dark sky. She watched a couple pass below, arms linked under a shared umbrella, their laughter faint through the double-paned glass. A delivery man wheeled a cart of folded linens across the alley. A woman in heels rushed into a taxi, clutching shopping bags. Paris moved on, unbothered, as it always had. She placed a hand gently against the window pane. The glass was cool beneath her fingertips. Her thoughts wandered back and forth between the past and present, between then and now. She remembered being 19, newly married, believing life would unfold like a steady script, but life had rewritten that script again and again. Divorce, moves, empty bank accounts, sleepless nights, long shifts. But also laughter, growth, discovery. Keanu's first acting gig. Kim's recovery from surgery. Quiet moments of grace. Still, there had been so many closed doors along the way. She thought of the bank manager who once laughed when she asked for a loan to start her own business. She remembered the landlord who called her a risk because she had children and no husband. She remembered the saleswoman who followed her through a store because she had used a $5 bill that was worn and creased. Each moment small, each one forgotten by the world, but never by her. And now, at 79, on a trip she had planned to be a celebration, a stranger had reminded her of it all. She turned back from the window and picked up her phone. Keanu's message still glowed on the screen. She thought about calling him. She almost did. She knew what he would say. He'd drop everything. He'd ask who the man was, what the store was called, if she was okay, if she needed anything. But she also knew that look in his eyes when he got quiet, that stillness that meant he was already forming a plan. She didn't want to be the reason he got angry or distracted or burdened. So she typed out a reply that said simply, "Thank you, darling. Paris is beautiful. I'm taking it all in. Love you so much." She said it and set the phone down gently on the nightstand. Then she turned off the lamp, pulled the covers up to her chin, and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she would visit a museum, maybe walk through a garden. She would wear the same shoes, the same scarf. She would carry herself like she always had, with quiet strength. She didn't know yet that her son would soon find out. And when he did, the door that closed on her would become a door the whole world would learn to open. The next morning, Patricia rose slowly, the stiffness in her back reminding her that she wasn't 30 anymore. The sky outside was clear, Paris washed fresh by the night's rain. Sunlight filtered through the curtains as she made a cup of tea and opened the window just enough to feel the breeze. She took in the quiet hum of the city waking up. For a moment, it almost made her forget the ache from the day before. Then her phone buzzed. It was a video call. Keanu? She smiled before she even answered. His name lit up the screen like a comfort. She ran a quick hand through her hair, adjusted her robe, and tapped accept. There she is, Keanu said, his face filling the screen, backlit by California sunshine and framed by the walls of a trailer on a film set. Happy birthday, Mom. His voice was warm, steady, his eyes soft with affection. Hello, darling, Patricia replied, her voice brightening instinctively. You're working already? I'm between scenes, he said, but I wasn't going to miss this. How's Paris treating you? She hesitated, the smile still on her lips. It's beautiful. I had a nice little walk yesterday, saw the river. The light here, oh, you'd love it. He raised an eyebrow, his gaze narrowing just slightly. Did you get yourself something? I told you to treat yourself. Patricia sipped her tea, careful not to let the pause linger too long. Well, I looked around. Didn't find the right thing yet. You know me. Too picky. Keanu tilted his head, studying her more closely now. Mom? She looked back at the screen, still smiling. You didn't find something, or something happened? There it was. That familiar tone in his voice, gentle but anchored in truth. She had heard it since he was a boy, that quiet sensitivity he carried, always listening, deeper than people realized. Keanu, she said, shaking her head, honestly, it's not worth worrying about. I'm fine. He didn't flinch. What happened? She sighed. Nothing serious, just a little moment. Keanu leaned closer to the camera. Tell me. She hesitated, then placed her cup down. She didn't want to make a big deal of it, but something inside her knew he deserved the truth. Not just because he was her son, but because he was the kind of man who wanted to understand the world, even when it hurt. So, with quiet precision, she told him. She didn't dramatize it. That wasn't her way. She told him how she had passed the boutique on Avenue Montaigne, how the windows sparkled, how she had saved up for something small, a birthday keepsake. How the doorman had stepped in front of her and told her the store was closed for a private event. And how, moments later, others walked in right behind her. He looked me over, Patricia said, her voice calm but tight, and decided I didn't belong. He didn't yell, he didn't raise his voice. But he didn't need to. Keanu's expression didn't change much. But his eyes, those steady, deep-set eyes, grew still. Hell, said maybe I'd find something more appropriate at a tourist shop, she added, almost laughing. Imagine that. He blinked slowly, then leaned back in his chair. I didn't want to tell you, she said gently. I knew it would upset you. And really, Keanu, it's nothing, just some man doing his job. No, he replied, his voice low, controlled. That's not his job. She tried to lighten the moment. It's fine, darling, I walked away. I didn't even let it ruin my day, much. But Keanu wasn't smiling. Do you remember, he said quietly, when I was 12, that winter in Toronto? You had saved up for a coat, nothing fancy, just a real winter coat that wasn't secondhand. She nodded, surprised he remembered. I do. I found it at a clearance rack after weeks of searching. And the store clerk ignored you the entire time, he added. You tried to ask for a different size, and she walked away like you weren't even there. Patricia gave a soft nod. I remember. I remember too, he said. You told me later that some people only see labels, not people. She reached toward the screen, like she could touch his face. That was a long time ago. Keanu held her gaze. And it still happens to you? It happens to a lot of people, she said gently. People who don't have sons like you to listen. It made him pause. Then he asked, "What was the name of the store?" She hesitated. "Keanu?" He waited. She sighed. "Belvoir. Avenue Montaigne, but please, don't make this a thing. I don't want drama. I don't want them punished." "I'm not thinking about punishment," he said softly. "I'm thinking about meaning." Patricia closed her eyes for a moment. She had seen this look before, when he had decided to leave high school early, when he first moved to Los Angeles, when he took the role in that small indie film no one believed in. It was quiet resolve. Once it appeared, nothing could stop it. "Promise me you won't overreact," she said, opening her eyes. He gave a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I promise not to embarrass you." He raised an eyebrow. "That's not quite the same thing. It's the best I can do," he said. "You know me." She did. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Patricia looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. Keanu watched her from across the digital distance, his mind clearly racing beneath the still surface of his expression. Finally, she looked back up. "You're filming. I shouldn't have brought this up." He shook his head. "No. I'm glad you did." "I didn't want you to feel like you had to fix it," she said softly. Keanu gave a quiet sigh. "I don't want to fix it for you, Mom. I want to fix it because it's broken." Patricia let that settle in the silence. "Do you know what bothered me the most?" she asked. He leaned forward slightly. It wasn't the man himself, or even the words he said. It was how easy it was for him, how quick, how automatic. Like he didn't even question whether I might be worth his time. Keanu nodded slowly. "You spent your whole life giving other people dignity, and he couldn't give you 30 seconds. I don't need his permission to feel worthy," she said firmly. "No," Keanu agreed. "But you deserved better." She smiled again, tired but touched. "Don't go doing anything outrageous, Keanu." "No guarantees," he replied. She chuckled, then reached again for her tea. "Anyway, I'm letting it go. I just needed to say it out loud, I suppose. Now it's out of my system." "I'm still going to look into it," Keanu said, matter of fact. "Of course you are," she said, shaking her head. He changed the subject, but the shift wasn't jarring. He had a way of moving between heaviness and warmth, like turning a page. They spoke about the film he was shooting, a new director he was enjoying working with. He asked about her favorite meal in Paris so far. She told him about the little cafe down the street and the almond croissants she had nearly cried over because they tasted so much like the ones she used to make when he was little. By the time the call ended, the sadness had softened, but something else had taken its place, a quiet awareness. A door had been opened between them, a vulnerable one, and Keanu had stepped through it like he always did, with care, with quiet fire. "Happy birthday again, Mom," he said. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. "I love you. I love you more." As the call ended and the screen faded to black, Patricia sat still for a long moment, staring at the reflection of herself in the darkened glass. She knew her son. She knew that when he heard something unjust, he didn't shake it off. He carried it. And that look in his eyes, that thoughtful stillness, meant he was already thinking, already moving. She whispered to the quiet room, "Please don't make a scene, Keanu." But deep down, she knew the world had just shifted. Patricia lay awake long after the video call had ended. The lights were off. The sounds of the city had softened into a distant hum. But her mind was wide awake, stirring with memories that had been quiet for years. She rolled onto her side, reaching once more for the envelope of old photographs tucked into the drawer beside her bed. She didn't need to see them again to remember. The images were etched into her memory. But tonight, they felt closer, louder, more alive. She thought about their apartment in Toronto, the one with the cracked windows and the leaky bathroom. The carpet was worn thin, and the radiator groaned like an old man in winter. But it had been their home. Keanu and Kim had grown up there, with hand-me-down books, second-hand furniture, and more love than money could buy. She remembered one winter in particular. It had snowed for 4 straight days. The sidewalks were slick with ice, and the roof leaked near the back hallway. She had wrapped towels along the floor to keep it dry. Their landlord had stopped by without warning, annoyed at her request for repairs. He stood in the doorway, tall and smug, arms crossed over a thick wool coat. His eyes scanned the apartment like it disgusted him. Turning toward him, "I don't know why you're asking for so much, Patricia," he said coldly. "Maybe if you didn't have 2 kids to worry about, you could keep the place better maintained." She remembered standing there, stunned, embarrassed, angry, but more than anything, exhausted. Before she could respond, she felt a small hand slip into hers. Keanu had walked out from the hallway, his eyes locked on the man. He was only 10, but something in him had already hardened. His jaw clenched, his shoulders stiffened. There was no fear in his eyes, just a quiet warning. "She's doing her best," Keanu said, voice low but clear. "Better than you would." The landlord scoffed, muttered something under his breath, and turned away. Patricia hadn't said a word until the door closed. Then she knelt beside her son and looked him in the eye. "Thank you," she whispered. "But you don't have to protect me." "Yes, I do," he said. "Someone has to." She hadn't forgotten that moment, not even now. Because when she stood outside the boutique in Paris, turned away not with words but with looks, it felt like stepping back into that memory. Like being that single mother again, standing in front of a man who saw her as less than she was. Less than enough. Except this time she was older. She had worked her whole life to build dignity, and still, it had been stripped with a glance. She clutched the photo tighter against her chest and whispered into the dark, "Why does it still feel like this?" Patricia sat up in bed, placing the photograph gently on the nightstand. Her fingers lingered on the edge of the frame, as though holding onto the moment would steady her. The picture was faded, but the memory wasn't. Keanu had stood beside her that day like a little soldier, shoulders squared, mouth pressed tight, his brown eyes filled with silent fire. That same fire lived in him still. She had seen it on the screen during their call. Calm on the outside, but beneath the surface, a current moving fast. She wrapped the shawl tighter around her shoulders and walked to the window. Paris sparkled beneath her like a dream she didn't quite belong to. Somewhere down there, the boutique still stood, the one with marble floors, gold door handles, and people who thought kindness was optional. She thought about how far she had come, the years of juggling sewing jobs and costume gigs, designing wardrobe pieces for theater shows and indie films, anything to keep the lights on. There had been nights she didn't eat so her kids could, times when she mended her shoes instead of replacing them because rent came first. She used to walk Kim to school in the morning, then rush home to prepare meals ahead of time before heading to work. Her children never heard her complain, not once, but the weight never left. Even when her son became famous, even when her name appeared in magazines alongside his, even now, walking the streets of Paris. Because the truth was, dignity didn't come from a last name or a bank account. It came from within, and when someone tried to take that from you, no matter how quietly, it still cut. She thought about the looks she used to get at school meetings, how teachers would ask questions with raised eyebrows, how some mothers avoided sitting near her. She never dressed to impress, she dressed to endure. And now, all these years later, she still found herself standing in front of polished doors, being measured by fabric and jewelry instead of heart and history. She closed her eyes. What bothered her most wasn't the doorman's words, but the way they echoed every time someone looked at her and saw less, echoed every time society rewarded appearances over substance. She wasn't bitter. She didn't carry hatred. But the ache was real. The ache of being reminded that in certain spaces, she still didn't belong. It was not because of who she was, but because someone else decided she wasn't enough to open the door for. That kind of judgment had followed her for decades, always reshaping itself in new forms. A landlord's insult, a boutique's barrier, a cold stare on the subway. It wasn't the rejection itself that stung, it was what it stirred inside her. Memories she had tried to bury, and a quiet fear that maybe, deep down, the world hadn't changed as much as she'd hoped. Patricia turned away from the window and sat down on the small velvet chair beside the lamp. She pulled a soft blanket over her lap and reached again for her old notebook. Inside were pages of sketches, lists, and private reflections. She hadn't opened it in a while. Tonight, though, something urged her. She flipped through to a page dated 20 years ago. The ink had faded, but her handwriting was still clear. That day, she had written about making Keanu's first stage costume. He had landed a part in a school play, and they couldn't afford anything fancy, so she'd stayed up until 2 a.m. hand-stitching the fabric, praying the seams would hold when he stepped into the spotlight. He didn't just wear that costume. He wore her love, her effort, her belief in him. Even now, decades later, Keanu still thanked her for it. Every award, every milestone. He never let her forget that her sacrifices mattered. But today reminded her of the years before all of that, when she was the one being judged, ignored, sidelined, and somehow, even now, it still found her. She didn't need the boutique's approval. She didn't need their trinkets or expensive scarves. She had lived through storms far colder than Paris rain. She had faced landlords, bank officers, even immigration forms that made her feel invisible. Yet she endured, and she raised 2 remarkable children who loved her more fiercely than words could express. Still, rejection had a way of stirring ghosts, not just of poverty or loneliness, but of feeling unseen. Patricia whispered to herself in the silence, "I'm not that woman anymore." But some days, the world made her feel like she still was. A soft knock sounded at the hotel room door. Just room service, delivering tea she hadn't ordered but accepted anyway. As the attendant wheeled the tray inside, he smiled politely, bowing slightly before exiting. She noticed he had placed a single pink macaron beside the teacup. It reminded her of the boutique. She almost laughed. The thing she wanted most that morning wasn't expensive or rare. Just a small, lovely keepsake to remind herself that her life still had color, that aging didn't mean fading, that she could still walk into a room and feel worthy. She took a sip of tea and stared again out the window. She didn't plan to tell Keanu. She didn't want to burden him. He had enough weight on his shoulders. The world leaned on him constantly, for wisdom, for comfort, for quiet strength. Let this just be something she carried, like so many other things. But deep down, Patricia knew her son. He would find out, and when he did, he wouldn't let it slide. Because long ago, he promised to protect her. And some promises, especially the ones whispered by a 10-year-old boy with fire in his eyes, were never meant to be broken. The sun hadn't yet risen over Los Angeles, but Keanu Reeves was already awake. He hadn't slept much. His mother's face during their call lingered in his mind, her smile strained, her voice soft, her eyes trying not to betray the ache beneath. Keanu sat on the edge of his hotel bed, phone in hand. He stared at the screen for a moment, thumb hovering over the contact list, then tapped. It rang twice before Daniel answered. "Boss, everything okay?" came the groggy voice of his longtime assistant. Keanu didn't waste time. "Daniel, I need a favor. Urgent." He could hear Daniel already shifting in bed, alert. "I'm listening." There's a boutique in Paris. It's on Rue Saint-Honoré. Small frontage, but expensive brand. I don't know the name exactly, but I can describe it. Daniel cleared his throat, trying to match Keanu's energy. What happened? Naomi turned my mother away, Keanu said quietly. She went in for her birthday, just wanted something small, but the doorman blocked her. Judged her based on how she looked. There was a pause. Daniel exhaled slowly. I'm sorry, Keanu. That's awful. I need to know everything about that store, Keanu continued. Who owns the brand? Who manages the Paris location? Who leases the property? I want building records, lease agreements, franchise details, if it's a franchise. Daniel was now fully awake. Got it. Are we planning to go public with this? Keanu shook his head, even though Daniel couldn't see it. No, this isn't about making a scene. I don't want revenge. I want to understand the roots of how this place operates. Daniel paused again. You're thinking of buying it? Keanu stood and began pacing the room. Maybe, or something near it, but it's not about ownership. It's about meaning, about presence. That store made my mother feel like she didn't belong, and I can't let that be the last word. I'll get on it, Daniel said, already clicking keys in the background. Do you want me to reach out to any real estate people in Paris? Yes, Keanu replied, and find out if there have been any complaints filed against that boutique. I'm sure my mother isn't the first person they've treated like that. I need to know what kind of culture they run. Understood. Keanu paused. Daniel? Yeah. I don't want to punish them, he said, voice firm now. I want to change what luxury means. Silence. Then Daniel responded, slower this time. Okay, I get it. This is bigger than a store. Keanu nodded. Much bigger. By mid-morning, Daniel had compiled a thick file of intel. The boutique in question was called Maison Élitaire, one of Paris's most exclusive designer houses. Family-owned for generations, it had cultivated an image of timeless elitism, priding itself on discretion, tradition, and an unspoken dress code that often alienated anyone outside the upper crust. The doorman, Jean-Paul Marceau, had worked there for over a decade. No public complaints were filed, but Daniel found several online reviews buried in travel blogs that echoed similar stories. Older women, tourists, single parents, all subtly discouraged or outright turned away at the door. Daniel forwarded everything to Keanu, along with a note. Pattern confirmed. You were right. Keanu sat at a quiet corner table inside a studio lounge, reading every word. No cameras, no staff, just him and the quiet hum of distant rehearsals. The more he read, the heavier his chest felt. Not from anger, but from deep disappointment. He opened his notebook and began sketching something. Not words at first, but space, a storefront, a name, ideas, fragments of emotion. What would a luxury store look like if it were built around dignity, not exclusion? He remembered being 10 years old, watching his mother sell hand-sewn dresses at flea markets just to keep food on the table. She wore pride like a second skin, never letting poverty dictate her posture. The world called her modest, but to Keanu, she had always been royalty. And now, at nearly 80, someone had looked at her and seen nothing. He closed the notebook. Enough planning. Now came action. He called Daniel again. Did you find the landlord? I did, Daniel replied. The building's owned by an old family trust, but here's the twist. It's not just retail. The top floors are apartments. A few are vacant. I also found out that the boutique's lease is up for renewal next quarter. They've been having trouble with tenant negotiations due to changing neighborhood laws. Keanu didn't respond right away. I'm not saying we force them out, Daniel added carefully. But there's an opportunity here. The trust is open to outside offers, especially if they align with cultural or philanthropic missions. Keanu's eyes sharpened. We create something different, he said. Same location, same elegance, But we turn the model upside down. Imagine a luxury space where the first rule is everyone is welcome. No velvet ropes, no judgments. Just warmth, excellence, and soul. Daniel's voice cracked slightly. That would be incredible. Keanu's tone softened. We'll need architects, designers, community consultants. I want every inch of it to whisper dignity. He paused. And we'll need someone on the ground in Paris. I'll book a flight, Daniel offered. No, Keanu said. Not yet. Let's reach out to someone local, someone who's seen how the store works, from the inside. He remembered the young woman from the security footage, the one who had looked horrified but said nothing. Sophia, he whispered. We find her. Sophia Leclerc was just finishing her shift when her phone buzzed with an unknown Paris number. She hesitated. After the boutique incident, things at work had grown colder. The manager, sensing her discomfort that day, had pulled her aside and reminded her sternly that appearances matter. Sophia had nodded, but something inside her had cracked. She stepped outside onto the cobbled back alley and answered. Hello? A warm voice replied. Bonjour, is this Sophia Leclerc? Yes. Who is this? My name is Daniel Cho. I'm calling on behalf of Keanu Reeves. Silence. I know this sounds strange, Daniel continued, his tone respectful. But we believe you witnessed something at Maison Elitaire a few days ago, involving a woman named Patricia Taylor. Sophia's breath caught. Yes, I did. I didn't do anything. I wanted to, but you don't have to explain, Daniel said gently. Mr. Reeves isn't looking to blame anyone. In fact, he's hoping you might help make something better. Sophia looked around, heart pounding. Help? How? We'd like to meet, Daniel said, if you're open to it. We're working on a project that could redefine what luxury means. Your insight from the inside would be invaluable. Sophia leaned against the cold stone wall, blinking back tears. No one had ever asked her opinion on anything that mattered. She said yes. 2 days later, she found herself sitting across from Keanu Reeves in a quiet Paris cafe tucked behind Notre Dame. He was dressed in black, cap pulled low, unassuming but unmistakable. He didn't start with business. He started with gratitude. My mother didn't even tell me, he said. She's always tried to protect me from the hard stuff. But this time, I think the world needs to see what that kind of exclusion still looks like and how we can respond to it. Sophia nodded slowly, then confessed, I wanted to say something that day, but I was afraid. We're trained to serve beauty, not humanity. Keanu smiled, bittersweet. Then let's build something that serves both. Over the next hour, they talked design, symbolism, and silent dignity. Keanu asked her about how customers were treated, about the subtle signals that told someone whether they belonged. Sophia spoke about body language, tone, and how certain guests, especially elderly women, were dismissed before a word was said. By the end of the meeting, Keanu stood and extended his hand. We're not just opening a store, he said. We're starting a conversation. Sophia shook his hand, her voice firm. Then I'm ready to speak. Later that night, Keanu sat alone in his hotel room, Patricia's voice still echoing in his mind. I didn't belong there. He looked out at the Eiffel Tower shimmering across the sand and whispered to himself, You always belonged, Mom. They're just not ready for your kind of royalty. And with that, the real work began. It began with whispers. 2 junior assistants returning from lunch said they overheard men in suits talking near the building's entrance. One claimed the boutique's lease had quietly changed hands. Another mentioned a foreign buyer. A week ago, it would have sounded absurd, but now, with all the odd meetings taking place upstairs, strangers in expensive shoes inspecting crown moldings, taking photos of hinges and doorknobs, the gossip didn't feel so wild anymore. Inside the boutique, tension simmered like steam under a glass lid. Madame Leclerc, the store's iron-spined manager, stood behind the marble counter flipping through invoices with unusual speed. Her fingers trembled slightly, though she would never admit it. At 61, she had survived 3 ownership changes, 1 global recession, and the rise of online retail. She did not panic easily, but this time something felt different. The boutique had always belonged to the Elitaire family, passed down through 3 generations of Parisian aristocrats. Maison Elitaire wasn't just a store. It was a fortress of exclusivity, a museum of curated arrogance. For it to be sold, quietly, without so much as a staff memo, that suggested power was shifting hands above even Madame Leclerc's reach. She looked toward the front door and narrowed her eyes at Vincent. The doorman stood as confidently as ever, arms crossed, posture perfect, his designer uniform pressed within an inch of its life. To him, nothing had changed. In fact, he seemed pleased with the swirling rumors. He thrived on hierarchy. If a mysterious buyer was coming, all the better. New bosses loved displays of loyalty. Vincent leaned toward the security camera screen and adjusted his collar with satisfaction. "Let him come," he muttered. "I'm not worried. Some American buying a Paris building doesn't mean he knows fashion." Behind him, Sophia Leclerc paused. She had just stepped into the break room when she heard Vincent's voice. Something about his arrogance scraped against her nerves more than usual. She had always tried to stay invisible, head down, do her job. But lately that had grown impossible. She knew something was coming. She could feel it in the way her mother, Madame Leclerc, had grown quieter during morning meetings, in the way Daniel Cho had asked her to be discreet, but had mentioned plans in motion, and in the way her phone had buzzed just this morning with a message from a blocked number. "Thank you for your courage. We haven't forgotten. Soon." Sophia didn't know who had sent it, but she had a feeling. She tucked the message into the pocket of her heart and returned to work. The next morning, the boutique opened as usual, but the rhythm was off. Foot traffic was slow. The regulars, older socialites, trust fund heirs, polished collectors, hadn't come. Instead, there were men in dark jackets across the street, standing just a little too still. They weren't window shopping, they were observing. Madame Leclerc noticed first. She closed the accounting binder in front of her and stepped out of the office, heels clicking softly on the polished floor. Her gaze flicked toward the entrance. The doorman, Vincent, gave her a short nod, but she didn't return it. Instead, she called Sophia over with a subtle wave. "Something's happening," she said under her breath. Sophia glanced toward the street. "They've been there for almost an hour, not moving, just watching." "Building inspectors, maybe?" Madame Leclerc suggested, but the way she said it lacked conviction. "No badges," Sophia replied, "and one of them had a discreet earpiece." Madame Leclerc's eyes narrowed. She hated being blindsided, and this situation reeked of secrecy. Vincent, meanwhile, remained blissfully unbothered. He preened in the boutique's front reflection, adjusting his cuffs. The very idea that anyone would challenge the sanctity of Maison Elitaire amused him. He believed himself to be an institution, just like the store. "Probably paparazzi," he told a customer who asked about the men. "You know how they follow celebrities. The city's full of them this week." But Sophia knew better. The tension wasn't the kind the press stirred. It was the kind that preceded change. At noon, the main phone rang. Not the showroom line, but the private office extension. Only a few people had that number. Madame Leclerc's hand hesitated for just a moment before she answered. Her face stiffened. She listened in silence. Then, a clipped, "Understood," and the call ended. Sophia waited nearby, pretending to arrange silk scarves, but watching closely. Madame Leclerc slowly turned toward her. Her lips were pressed into a hard line, but her voice came out calm. "There will be visitors this week," she said. Sophia nodded, heart pounding. "What kind of visitors?" "Silent ones, observers. They may not introduce themselves, but treat them with the same respect you give to the Elitaire family." Sophia blinked. "So, It's true? Madame Leclerc didn't answer directly. The world changes, Sophia. Sometimes it changes while people like Vincent still think they're standing still. That was the only confirmation she would offer, but it was enough. Sophia returned to the register, her thoughts racing. Someone powerful was coming, someone who didn't need to announce themselves with press or protocol. And deep down she wondered, no, hoped. It might be the man whose mother had been turned away in the rain. By Wednesday morning, the mood at Maison Elitaire had shifted from silent suspicion to quiet dread. The silence from upper management spoke volumes. Usually, Madame Leclerc would receive updates from corporate. Style memos, visit alerts, brand liaison communications. But the inbox had gone dark. No forecasts, no sale targets, no seasonal directive. Just one short email forwarded to her personal account at dawn. Effective immediately, Maison Elitaire Paris is under transition. All staff contracts will be honored. Please maintain regular operations. New ownership will introduce changes within the week. There was no name, no signature, just that. Vincent heard about it from a delivery guy when he marched into the break room waving his phone, laughing that rich Americans probably bought the block. No one laughed with him. His voice echoed too loud in a room where tension was growing like mold in corners no one could clean. Sophia sat across from him, sipping her tea slowly. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept her eyes down. She didn't trust Vincent, not after what he'd done to that kind older woman. She still remembered Patricia's face, gentle, worn, full of grace, and the way her shoulders had dropped as she turned away. Unwelcomed, unvalued, that image haunted her. What haunted her more was how she'd done nothing. She could have said something, anything, even just a soft, "Ma'am, please, wait here, let me get someone." But she hadn't. Fear had ruled her. The fear of losing her job, of crossing Vincent, of standing out. And now, the wind was shifting. That afternoon, an unmarked black van arrived. It didn't park out front. It stopped one block over, near the alley. Two men in crisp charcoal suits stepped out, no visible IDs, no entourage, and walked straight toward the rear entrance. Madame Leclerc met them personally. She didn't tell the staff what was said, but after they left, she returned to her office, locked the door, and didn't come out for 3 hours. By the time she emerged, her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "Everyone," she called out across the boutique floor, "there will be changes in how we operate. Please remain professional. You are being observed." Vincent scoffed under his breath. This again? But Sophia stood straighter behind the counter. In the following days, things became stranger. A team of cleaners arrived to polish the marble floors at midnight. New security cameras were installed, not outside, but discreetly within the showroom itself. The lights were recalibrated. The music playlist changed from sterile ambient tones to soft jazz and classical guitar. The boutique's old-world austerity softened, imperceptibly at first, but enough that even long-time patrons commented. By Friday, rumors were no longer whispers. Words spread through the Paris fashion district like perfume on silk. Maison Elitaire had been sold, not to a rival conglomerate, not to a royal family, but to someone no one could track, someone who wasn't listed on shareholder rolls, someone private, powerful, unseen. And according to one of the Marvel installers, who claimed he overheard a conversation between security staff, the new owner wasn't just buying the building, he was rebuilding its soul. Sophia stayed late that night, pretending to finish inventory. She stood by the window, watching the final sunlight fade behind the rooftops of Rue Saint-Honoré. She didn't know who was coming, but something inside her hoped it was the man with the quiet voice and kind eyes, the one who might walk in one day, not to scold, not to boast, but simply to remind the world that everyone deserves dignity, even the mothers who are turned away. The envelope arrived just before noon. A soft knock on the door of Patricia's hotel room pulled her from her thoughts. She'd been sitting by the window again, sipping lukewarm tea and tracing the rooftops of Paris with her eyes. The city looked calm, unbothered, but her heart was still uneasy. She opened the door, expecting housekeeping or perhaps a delivery mix-up. But standing there was a sharply dressed young woman with an envelope in hand, gold-trimmed, heavy, formal. She didn't say a word, only offered a warm nod and handed it over before disappearing down the hallway in silence. Patrice turned the envelope over in her hands. No return address, just her name. Her full name, written in deep black ink in delicate cursive, Patricia Taylor. The paper smelled faintly of rose and leather. Inside, she found a single folded card with embossed gold edges, thicker than any stationery she'd ever touched. The weight of it carried intention. She unfolded it slowly. You are cordially invited to a private evening reception at Maison Alitaire, Rue Saint-Honore, Paris, Saturday, 7:00 p.m. sharp. An honored guest awaits you. Formal attire requested. Patricia stared at the card, her eyes frozen on the words Maison Alitaire. Her breath caught in her throat. She read the note again, and then once more. Her hands began to tremble. She didn't need to ask who was behind it. Her heart knew. Only one person could orchestrate something like this. Only one person would go through such quiet effort, disguising love inside formality, planning behind shadows. Keanu. She pressed the card to her chest and let out a quiet breath, part laugh, part sigh, part disbelief. "Oh, Keanu," she whispered softly to the quiet room. "What have you done now?" The hotel room felt suddenly unfamiliar, like a stage waiting for a new act to begin. Her suitcase sat open by the bed, still only half unpacked, but nestled between the folded sweaters and jeans was a single black dress. Simple, long-sleeved with a modest neckline. It wasn't new. She'd worn it to a dinner in Toronto 2 years ago. She had almost left it behind for this trip, but something told her to bring it just in case. She reached for it now, laying it across the bed. The fabric was slightly wrinkled, but she knew the hotel offered pressing service. It would do. She looked in the mirror and saw not just a woman in her 70s, but a mother, a survivor, a woman who had known poverty, had known judgment, had known what it felt like to be dismissed. But tonight, she would walk into that store not as a shopper, not as someone asking for permission, but as someone being expected. And that changed everything. Patricia pressed the black dress against her chest and stood by the window, the card still resting gently on the table beside her. Outside, the street bustled with the rhythm of a Parisian afternoon. Mopeds buzzing, heels clacking, cafe chairs scraping against stone sidewalks. She could see the boutique from where she stood. Maison Alitaire, the same awning, the same ornate doors, the same threshold she hadn't been allowed to cross. Her eyes lingered there, where the doorman had once blocked her path without hesitation. He had judged her based on the simplicity of her clothes and the tired lines around her eyes. But tonight, it seemed, those doors would open for her. Still, she wasn't ready to celebrate. She knew Keanu. She knew the quiet depth of his intentions. If he had arranged this, it wasn't to humiliate anyone or make a scene. That wasn't his style. He wasn't interested in revenge. He never had been. He believed in change. He believed in meaning. And he believed in making people feel seen. Patricia walked to the closet and hung the dress carefully, smoothing its sleeves with her hand. Her reflection caught in the mirror. For a long moment, she didn't look away. It had been years since she truly dressed up for anything formal. Years since she felt like someone important. And now, on a random Saturday night in Paris, her son had found a way to remind her that she mattered, not just to him, but to the world. She pulled out her small travel makeup kit and examined the worn brushes and faded blush. No glamour, just grace. It was enough. Next came the shoes, black flats with a polished buckle, comfortable but elegant. She had bought them last spring not for style, but for walking long museum halls and cobbled streets. She didn't own heels anymore, but tonight these would carry her just fine. By the time she was done laying out her outfit, she sat down at the desk and opened her journal, a soft leather book with worn corners. It traveled with her everywhere. She flipped to a blank page and picked up her pen. "Dear Keanu," she wrote, her hand steady. "I received the invitation. I know it was you. I want to tell you I'm not nervous, but that would be a lie. I'm not afraid of the store. I'm not afraid of the people. I'm just afraid of feeling something too deeply. But maybe that's the point." She paused, then smiled as she added, "Leave it to you to remind me on my birthday that being seen isn't something to be earned. It's something to be reclaimed." She didn't sign it. She never signed her letters to him. She always waited to finish them in person. Folding the page neatly, she slid it between the journal's cover and closed it softly. Outside, the boutique remained silent, but inside her something had already opened. Evening descended slowly over Paris, casting golden light across the rooftops and softening the skyline into something almost dreamlike. Patricia stood once more at the mirror, this time fully dressed. The simple black gown fell elegantly along her frame, and a pearl brooch, gifted to her by Keanu years ago, glimmered softly near her collarbone. She touched it gently, remembering the day he gave it to her. It wasn't her birthday, it wasn't a holiday, it was just a Tuesday. He had shown up at her door, fresh off filming, and said, "You've held the family together your whole life. I just wanted to say thank you." She hadn't needed a gift that day, but he had needed to give one. Now, the brooch felt like armor. The knock at the door startled her from the memory. She opened it to find a woman standing there, dressed in a sharply tailored charcoal suit. A black car idled behind her at the curb. "Madam Taylor?" the woman asked with a polite nod. "I'm here to escort you." Patricia gathered her shawl and followed, her heart beating faster with every step. She didn't ask questions. She knew there would be no answers, only moments, layered one atop another, waiting to unfold. The ride was silent but smooth. Paris passed by in elegant swaths of light and shadow. When the car finally slowed, Patricia looked up and saw it. Maison Militaire. Only this time, the awning had changed. It still bore the store's name, but underneath in elegant gold script was something new. Open to all. Beauty in every soul. She blinked hard, unsure if she was imagining it. The car door opened. The same doorman stood outside, but his posture had changed. No arrogance, no crossed arms, just a deep, respectful bow as he opened the boutique door for her. "Welcome, madam," he said, voice low and sincere. Patricia stepped inside. The interior looked transformed. Gone were the pretentious lighting fixtures and overly pristine displays. The space felt warm, inviting. And at the center of the store stood a floral arrangement that took her breath away, not because of its size or extravagance, but because it mirrored the exact bouquet Keanu had made her from the neighbor's garden when he was 10. Wildflowers, uneven stems, sprigs of lavender. Her hand rose instinctively to her heart. A young woman approached her. It was Sophia. "Mrs. Taylor," she said softly, "tonight is for you. Mr. Reeves asked that we honor your story." Patricia's eyes welled with tears. She looked around and saw faces, employees, customers, strangers. But not one person looked away. Not one person judged her. In that moment, she didn't feel like a guest. She felt like the beating heart of the room. She smiled gently and whispered under her breath, "Oh, Keanu, what have you done now?" By twilight, the boutique had become unrecognizable. Golden spotlights bathed the building's new facade, highlighting the fresh awning with its welcoming message, "Open to all, beauty in every soul." A plush crimson carpet stretched from the curb to the boutique's double-glass doors, now framed in fresh lilies and warm amber lighting. Photographers lined the sidewalk, flashes going off in rhythmic bursts. Socialites, designers, influencers, and a few discreetly famous faces arrived in sleek limousines, greeted by a flurry of French accents, elegant laughter, and the soft popping of champagne corks. Vincent stood proudly at the entrance, suited in a finely pressed tuxedo, posture tall, face glowing with self-importance. He extended gloved hands to each guest, offering firm handshakes and broad smiles. The earlier panic that had swept through the staff had vanished from his demeanor, replaced by smug confidence. He didn't know who had purchased the building, nor why they were hosting this grand event, but Vincent had convinced himself that it must be a brilliant marketing ploy, and that he, the doorman, was now part of something exclusive. He relished it. As luxury cars pulled up one after another, he welcomed every new arrival with charm and flourish. Then a black sedan rolled to a quiet stop. The back door opened gently. Patricia stepped out. She wore the same black dress she'd prepared the night before, the same one she hadn't worn in years, the same one she almost didn't have the courage to put on. Her silver hair was pinned loosely at the back, and a soft scarf wrapped gently around her shoulders. The pearl brooch on her dress caught the light as she took her first step onto the red carpet. Vincent turned toward her, offering his practiced smile. He didn't recognize her. Not in this lighting, not in this setting, not in this version of herself. "Bonsoir, madame," he said with polished politeness, extending his hand. "Welcome to Maison Elitaire." Patricia paused just slightly, then slipped her hand into his with the grace of someone who had nothing to prove. "Thank you," she said, her voice warm. "How nice to be welcomed this time." Vincent's smile faltered for the briefest second, but she was already moving past him. Inside, the boutique shimmered with life. The walls glowed in candlelight, the shelves artfully arranged with a balance of high fashion and small artisan pieces. Music played from a live quartet tucked discreetly in one corner. Waiters moved between guests offering hors d'oeuvres, and champagne flowed freely. But not everyone inside was distracted by the glamour. Sophia stood near the central display table, adjusting the final touches of an exhibit dedicated to everyday elegance. It featured handbags crafted by single mothers in Marseille, scarves woven by retired grandmothers in Lyon, and journals hand-bound by formerly incarcerated women trying to rebuild their lives. It was a celebration of dignity, of worth beyond wealth. And then she saw Patricia. She didn't need to take a second look. Her stomach sank immediately. The memory of that rainy afternoon returned with painful clarity, the way Patricia had stood in the doorway, wet, dismissed, judged, and the way Sophia had remained silent. Now here Patricia was, radiant, elegant, strong. Sophia didn't know what had changed, but something in the air told her this night was more than just fashion. It was redemption. Patricia walked deeper into the boutique, taking in every detail. The displays were no longer cold glass pedestals for expensive handbags. They were warm, human. Each item had a card beside it, telling a name, a city, a small story. Made by Elise, age 74, former seamstress, now independent designer. Painted by Malika, mother of 3, first art gallery coming soon. Every corner of the store whispered a truth Patricia had always known in her bones. Beauty was everywhere, especially in those who had once been ignored. She passed a mirror, framed in soft velvet, and paused for a second. Her reflection stared back. Not the woman dismissed by a doorman, not the tired mother from years past, but someone whole, someone present, someone seen. Just then, Sophia approached, her face taut with emotion. "Madame," she began softly, "I don't know if you remember me." Patricia turned, eyes kind. "I do." Sophia lowered her gaze. "I saw what happened that day. I should have said something. I should have done something." Patricia touched her arm gently. "But you saw me, and you remember. That's something." Sophia looked up, surprised by the grace in Patricia's voice. "I never forgot your face," Sophia said. "You reminded me of my mother." Patricia smiled. "Then she must be a remarkable woman." Sophia laughed lightly through her nerves, then looked around. "Do you know what's happening tonight? Why everything's so different?" Patricia looked toward the grand chandelier above them, flickering like 1,000 stars. "I have a guess," she said quietly. The music shifted then. The quartet began a slower, richer melody. The crowd parted slightly near the front of the boutique, where a small elevated platform had been placed beneath the lights. A microphone stood alone. Whispers rippled through the guests. Sophia looked over, her breath catching, and Patricia turned. There he was, Keanu, dressed in a tailored black suit, no tie, hair slightly tousled, and his expression a blend of quiet warmth and absolute purpose. He walked toward the platform with the ease of someone used to cameras, but the humility of a man who never forgot where he came from. Patricia's eyes welled with tears. Sophia whispered, "He's here." Patricia nodded slowly. "He always shows up." Keanu stepped onto the platform and took the mic. The room fell into complete silence. No announcement, no title, no press. Just him and the crowd. But before he spoke, his eyes scanned the room until they landed on his mother. He smiled. And Patricia smiled back, knowing this was no longer about embarrassment, or revenge, or pity. This was something else entirely. It was a moment that would change everything. And it had only just begun. The lights dimmed so suddenly that a hush fell over the boutique like a blanket. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Champagne flutes paused mid-air. The string quartet trailed into silence. It wasn't abrupt. It was intentional. Controlled. The kind of pause that made the heart beat just a little faster. All eyes turned to the grand staircase that curved elegantly from the second floor, lined with red velvet and trimmed in gold. No spotlight was needed. The soft ambient glow of 100 hidden lights shimmered upward like candlelight in a cathedral. And then he appeared. At the top of the staircase stood Keanu Reeves. He wore a classic black suit, perfectly tailored, no tie. His shirt collar opened slightly, as if to say he wasn't there for ceremony, but for something real. His hair was brushed back gently, just as time had shaped it, a little wild, but deeply human. His posture was still, centered, calm, and yet in that stillness he radiated command. He didn't need to say a word. Gasps rippled through the crowd like wind over water. People had seen celebrities before, even legends, but this was different. It wasn't just who he was. It was why he was here. On the far side of the room, near one of the floral displays, Patricia froze. Her hands instinctively gripped the small clutch in front of her. Her breath caught, and beneath it, the quietest whisper slipped from her lips. "Oh, Keanu." He began to descend, one step at a time, slow, intentional. Each footfall echoed faintly through the hushed space. It was like watching a story unfold in real time, one written not in headlines, but in heartbeats. Vincent, the doorman who had once turned Patricia away, now stood by the entrance with his chin slightly lifted. But as Keanu passed, Vincent shifted awkwardly. His eyes darted toward the floor. He knew. He didn't need to be told. Sophia, standing just a few feet from Patricia, felt a knot form in her throat. She remembered that afternoon so clearly. The humiliation, the dismissal. And now this man, this son, was rewriting the ending right in front of her. Keanu's gaze swept across the room, acknowledging the guests, the curious onlookers, the elite faces of Paris who weren't used to being the ones watching. But his eyes didn't linger on any of them. They found one person, Patricia, and when he saw her, standing there in her simple black dress, her eyes shining but unsure, his entire face softened. That moment, silent, pure, real, shifted the entire room. He reached the bottom step and paused. The silence held, like the air before a storm or the breath before a confession. Then, without fanfare, he stepped off the staircase and walked toward the platform that had been prepared in the boutique's center. The crowd parted, not because someone asked, but because when presence is earned, space is given freely. And every step Keanu took was not toward a stage, but toward a purpose. What came next would not be fashion. It would be a declaration. Keanu reached the center of the boutique, now transformed into a luminous atrium. Above him, the chandeliers flickered like stars trapped in crystal. Around him, the guests stood in awed silence, unsure whether to applaud or simply watch. He looked over the crowd with a measured calm. Then he reached for a microphone that had been placed discreetly on a pedestal. An elegant black cylinder, polished but unobtrusive. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't fidget. He simply spoke. "I want to tell you a story," Keanu said. The room leaned in. Not long ago, a woman walked into this boutique. She wasn't wearing designer heels or a diamond watch. She wasn't escorted by bodyguards or paparazzi. She was simply herself. A shift moved through the room like a wave of realization. She was turned away at the door. He continued, his voice steady. Because someone decided she didn't look like luxury. At that moment, Patricia's face flushed, not with shame, but with quiet recognition. She knew this wasn't about revenge. This was about something bigger, something long overdue. "That woman," Keanu said, his eyes scanning the audience, "was my mother." A collective gasp, and then silence again. Deeper now, heavier. He continued, "She raised me with nothing but grit and grace. She worked 3 jobs so I could eat. She taught me to be kind, even when the world wasn't. She taught me that worth is not worn, it's lived." He paused. "And today, she walked through these doors again. Not as a guest, but as the reason we are all standing here." Eyes turned. A few gasps followed. Patricia stood still. She didn't smile, she didn't wave. She simply held her ground, tears brimming but unfallen. For once, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. Keanu turned back to the crowd. "Tonight is not a launch," he said. "It's a reset." He stepped aside and gestured toward the boutique's walls, now subtly lit with projected words, quotes from women of different ages, backgrounds, and walks of life. "Luxury is dignity. Luxury is kindness. Luxury is belonging." "I've bought this building," he said, his tone factual, not boastful. "Not to own it, but to open it. We're starting a new brand, one that partners with single mothers, refugees, and former garment workers." He let that land. "Everything here, from the fabrics to the hands that made them, will tell a different story, one of respect." And then, after a pause, "Because real luxury," Keanu said, "doesn't exclude, it uplifts." A beat of silence. Then came the first applause, scattered, hesitant. Then it grew. By the time Keanu stepped down from the pedestal, the entire boutique echoed with standing ovation. But Keanu didn't soak it in. He didn't wait for the cheers. He walked toward his mother, step by step, past the flashbulbs, past the curious faces, until he reached her. And in front of everyone, he didn't bow or boast. He simply leaned in, kissed her cheek gently, and whispered something only she could hear. Whatever he said, it made her close her eyes and hold his hand tighter. That moment, quiet and unphotographed, was the real center of the night. The staircase, the lights, the glitz, all faded behind them. Keanu had entered. But Patricia had arrived. Keanu returned to the pedestal slowly, the energy of the room still humming from his earlier words. But now, the mood had shifted. The applause had died down, but a sense of anticipation remained, palpable, thick, like the air before a storm breaks. He reached for the microphone again and let the room settle. "I want to tell you a little more about the woman I mentioned," he began. "Her name is Patricia Reeves." He paused and looked toward her. The spotlight caught her modest black dress and gentle expression, her hands folded calmly in front of her. "She is not just my mother," he continued. "She's the strongest person I know." Murmur passed through the crowd, a ripple of emotion. "When I was growing up, things weren't easy," Keanu said, his voice low but strong. "We moved apartments so often I stopped unpacking my things. Sometimes we ate dinner by candlelight, not for ambiance but because the power had been cut." A quiet chuckle rose and faded from the room. "But through all of that, my mother taught me something I've never forgotten. She said, 'Kindness is a form of wealth, and anyone can afford it.'" Keanu let those words sit with the crowd for a moment. 3 days ago," he continued, "Patricia walked into this very boutique, alone, with a cane, hoping to buy herself something beautiful. She had saved for months to make this trip, and I encouraged her to visit this place because I believed it represented elegance, art, and dignity." The room was completely silent now. "But instead of being welcomed," Keanu said slowly, "she was dismissed, judged, rejected." People began shifting uncomfortably. Madame Leclerc's jaw tensed across the room. Sophia lowered her gaze. Vincent, though still near the entrance, suddenly looked very, very small. "I don't blame a single employee," Keanu said, lifting his hand gently. "This isn't about one doorman or one moment." He paused, looked out at the rows of Parisian elite, designers, celebrities, editors, stylists, influencers. Then he exhaled. "This is about how we define luxury." Another silence, this one heavier. "When did we decide that luxury meant exclusion? That you have to look a certain way, wear a certain brand, speak a certain way, just to walk through a door?" He scanned the room again. "My mother deserved better," he said, "but so do all the people who are told every day that they're not enough, not rich enough, not stylish enough, not young enough." A woman in the front row wiped away a tear discreetly. A man near the back shifted his stance and crossed his arms. But even he didn't look away. "That's why I bought this boutique," Keanu said plainly. "Not to erase the past, but to reimagine the future." He motioned to the walls again. The soft projections continued cycling, the words glowing in golden light. "Kindness is couture. Craftsmanship has no class. Everyone belongs. This place will still be luxurious," he added. "But luxury to me is care. It's time, it's detail, and above all, respect." A thoughtful silence wrapped around the boutique as Keanu let the weight of his words settle. He could see it in their eyes. Something was shifting. The glimmer of admiration had replaced the earlier discomfort. Even those who had come for the glamour now found themselves swept into something deeper. Keanu glanced toward Patricia again. She hadn't moved, but her eyes shimmered. She gave him a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It said everything. He returned to the microphone with renewed calm. "Let me be clear," he said. "This isn't about punishment. I'm not here to fire anyone. I'm not here to embarrass people. That's not who I am." Several staff members exhaled visibly, but they didn't relax entirely. His tone carried grace, but also gravity. "I am, however," he continued, "here to offer an invitation. To every one of you." He gestured toward the boutique staff standing along the edges of the room. "To the employees who've worked long hours to serve clients, to the interns who've never been allowed to speak, to the seamstresses and the stylists and the warehouse workers, I see you, and I want this place to see you too. He stepped down from the platform and began walking slowly across the floor, speaking as he moved. This store will begin a new program, one that pays for continued education for every employee, no matter your title. You want to study design, fashion history, management? We'll fund it. Because talent doesn't always come wrapped in a perfect resume. Several employees stared in stunned silence. One woman brought her hand to her mouth. Another reached for her co-worker's hand. I've also partnered with local community centers across Paris to open this space once a week, Keanu continued. So young people who've never stepped foot in a boutique like this can come inside. Try on clothes, ask questions, learn what goes into the art of tailoring and fabric. Sophia blinked hard. Her lips parted slightly, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. It's not charity, Keanu said. It's investment in people. As he returned to center, he looked out over the crowd again. You see, my mother didn't need a gown to be beautiful. She didn't need a diamond to be valuable. What she needed, what we all need, is dignity. And I want this space to offer that. He turned to face Patricia fully now. This is for you, Mom. For every step you walked with holes in your shoes so I could go to school. For every night you worked 2 jobs so I wouldn't go hungry. For every time someone looked down on you and you still lifted your chin. She smiled through tears. The entire room turned to her, and for the first time that evening, it wasn't about Keanu Reeves, the celebrity. It was about Patricia Reeves, the mother who once stood in the cold outside this very store holding her son's hand. Keanu placed the microphone down gently. No music played, no applause erupted. There was only stillness. Then, like a slow tide, the room rose to its feet. Applause swelled, not in the showy, performative way of red carpet events, but in genuine respect. People clapped with open palms, some with tears, others with bowed heads. Vincent clapped too, though his hands moved slower than the rest. His face was tight with realization. Keanu didn't return to the stage. He simply stood beside his mother and took her hand. As the applause began to quiet, Keanu raised his hand slightly. The room stilled once more. He waited a beat, then stepped forward, a soft yet purposeful tone returning to his voice. Now that you've heard the heart behind this, he said, let me share the future. Eyes across the boutique focused on him. Some still emotional, others uncertain, a few skeptical. A waiter froze mid-step, holding a tray of champagne. A fashion journalist lowered her phone, sensing something bigger than an ordinary speech was unfolding. Keanu took a breath. This store will remain luxury, but not the kind that pushes people out. Not the kind that defines value by price tags or exclusivity. He turned slowly as he spoke, addressing everyone, not just the celebrities and influencers, but the seamstresses, the junior stylists, the delivery drivers watching from the back. I believe in craftsmanship, in artistry, in heritage, but I also believe that real luxury should never come at the expense of human dignity. Several heads nodded, cautiously. Others watched, arms crossed, unsure where this was going. He continued, So, here's what's changing. The boutique will now donate a portion of every sale, not the leftovers, not scraps, but a solid percentage of profits, to programs supporting single mothers, teachers, and community workers across France. Gasps moved through the room. A woman in the front blinked, startled. Teachers? She whispered to her neighbor. Yes, Keanu said, having overheard. Teachers, the ones who hold nations together, and single mothers, like my own, and hospital workers, social workers, street cleaners, anyone who gives more than they get. The boutique's marketing director, standing in the back, instinctively clutched her tablet. This wasn't in the brand manual, not even close. Keanu smiled gently. This isn't about guilt or charity. It's about balance. about remembering who we are, outside these walls. He stepped to the side and gestured toward a sleek mannequin now illuminated in a soft spotlight. The figure wore a beautifully crafted coat, tailored wool, classic silhouette, hand-stitched detailing, but with a discreet tag visible on the lapel, a subtle emblem embroidered in gold thread, 2 open hands facing upward. This, Keanu said, is part of the new community collection, a permanent line dedicated to the givers of the world. A murmur rose again. Some attendees looked intrigued, others looked baffled. Community collection items will not be priced by demand, Keanu explained. They'll be reserved for those who live lives of service, people nominated by others, not by their wallets. He paused, then added, "Yes, that includes public school teachers, hospice nurses, and even retired postal workers, anyone who shows up for others." From the side of the room, a soft voice spoke. "How will they afford it?" Keanu turned. "We'll make it affordable for them. We're not giving it away, we're honoring it. Every piece will still be made with care, precision, and elegance. But access will be earned through life's quiet heroism, not income." Sophia, who had remained frozen near the velvet rope, let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. He glanced toward her, locking eyes. "And the first thing our new staff policy will require," he said firmly, "is that every guest be greeted with respect, no exceptions, no assumptions, no measuring worth by watches, shoes, or accents." Silence followed his words. Not an awkward silence, but the kind that weighs heavily in the air. The kind that settles in your chest and asks you to think. Then a single clap echoed. It came from Madame Leclerc. She stepped forward from the shadows, her face composed but eyes glassy. She had run this boutique for over 20 years. Never had she imagined such a night, nor such a message. She looked at Keanu, then at Patricia standing off to the side in her simple black dress. Madame Leclerc spoke softly but clearly. "Monsieur Reeves, you are redefining the word maison. Not just a house of fashion, but a home for principle." "Yes. And I think..." More claps followed, then more. The ripple turned into a wave. Even those who had doubted, who had whispered moments earlier that this was all for show, found themselves moved. Something about the honesty, the elegance in Keanu's simplicity, left little room for cynicism. Vincent, the doorman, looked uncomfortable. He glanced around nervously. Just days ago, he had mocked a woman who now stood like quiet royalty in the corner, her presence radiant. He fidgeted with the cuff of his jacket. The words about greeting everyone with respect hung in the air like judgment, though Keanu had not pointed fingers. Sophia, on the other hand, stood taller. She had remembered Patricia the moment she walked in that night. Her eyes, her grace, her refusal to retaliate. And now, it all made sense. Keanu's entrance, the transformation, the purpose. It wasn't a publicity stunt. It was a statement. A revolution wearing a tailored suit. Keanu continued, "There will still be red carpet launches, still be high fashion. But side by side, there will be mentorship programs, internships for kids from underserved neighborhoods. Our tailors will teach, our designers will listen, our brand will evolve." Someone in the crowd chuckled, half skeptical. "And people will pay for that?" Keanu turned to them, no defensiveness in his tone, just quiet conviction. "People pay for what they believe in," he said. "And I believe they're ready to believe in something better." Cameras had stopped flashing. No one was thinking of social media posts anymore. The phones slowly lowered. Now they were simply listening. Patricia's heart swelled. She hadn't asked for any of this, hadn't expected her son to go this far. But as she looked at him standing there, calm and resolute, she realized this wasn't just about her. It was about dignity. It was about every person who had ever been judged by appearances, every mother who had walked into a store and been followed, every father who had told his child to dream but couldn't afford to dress the part, every artist whose hands created beauty but never had the chance to wear it. Keanu looked toward the ceiling as if searching for the right words to close. "I'm not trying to fix the world," he said gently, "but I can start with one corner of it. Right here." The room exhaled as one. A moment of silence lingered. Then applause thundered again. This time it was not polite. It was passionate. Fear, hope, and shock collided, shaping the dawn of something new. The following morning, the boutique's polished marble floors were silent, the chandeliers dimmed, and the velvet ropes removed. Instead of elite guests and flashing cameras, the room held rows of simple folding chairs lined neatly in front of the central staircase. For once, it wasn't about customers, it was about the staff. Employees filtered in hesitantly, still unsure of what awaited them. Some whispered nervously. Others, especially the younger ones, looked eager. Vincent entered last, shoulders tense, eyes darting as if searching for escape. He had survived the night before, but the memory of Keanu's words lingered, pressing on him heavier than any uniform had ever felt. Keanu appeared not in a designer suit, but in dark jeans and a soft shirt, his style plain and approachable. He didn't stand on the staircase or behind a podium. He stood among them. He wanted them to feel equal. "Thank you all for coming," he began. His tone was calm, the same as the night before, but now softer, more intimate. "Last night, I shared my vision for this place with the world. Today, I want to share it with you." The staff grew quiet. Some leaned forward. Others looked down, bracing themselves. "This store isn't just changing policies," Keanu said. "It's changing its heart. But hearts don't change from rules alone. They change when we understand why." He paused, his eyes flickering briefly toward Patricia, who was seated quietly in the back, observing. "When I was a boy, my mother worked multiple jobs to keep a roof over our heads. I remember nights when she came home with her hands raw from scrubbing, her feet blistered from walking. She always told me, never let anyone tell you your worth is in your shoes, your clothes, or your bank account." A murmur moved through the group. A seamstress dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Keanu continued, "She sacrificed so much. She gave me dignity when the world tried to take it from her. And that's what I want us to give everyone who walks through these doors. Dignity." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a younger stylist whispered, "That's beautiful." Keanu gave a small nod. "But it's also hard work. It means we must unlearn habits we've picked up. Habits like judging someone by their jacket, or assuming they won't buy because they walked in alone." His gaze swept across the staff before settling on Vincent. The doorman shifted uncomfortably, his usual swagger gone. "Vincent," Keanu said gently, not accusingly, "you made a mistake, but so have we all. The real question is what we do after." Vincent swallowed hard, his throat dry. For the first time, the staff saw a different side of him. Not the arrogant gatekeeper, but a man stripped of his pride. "I'm giving you a second chance," Keanu said. "But it comes with a condition. For 1 month, you'll work at community shelters. You'll serve people who have nothing, not because they can buy, but because they exist. You'll look into their eyes, and you'll see what dignity really means." The room stilled. Some employees exchanged glances. Others nodded quietly. Vincent lowered his head. His voice was low but clear. "I'll do it." And in that moment, the arrogance melted. He wasn't the same man. Keanu looked around. This is how transformation begins, not by punishment, but by perspective. Keanu let the weight of Vincent's acceptance linger before turning his attention back to the entire group. "This isn't just about one person," he said. "Every one of you has power. The way you look at someone when they enter, the way you speak to them, the way you make them feel. These are choices, and those choices define this boutique more than the marble floors or the golden handles ever could. The staff listened intently. Some nodded slowly, others folded their hands nervously in their laps. That's why we're creating something new here, Keanu continued. A committee dedicated to ensuring that dignity is not just a word, but a practice. It will be called the Dignity Committee, and it will be led by someone who already understands the importance of compassion. His eyes moved across the room and landed on Sophia. The young salesgirl froze, stunned. "Sophia," Keanu said gently, "I saw the way you looked at my mother that day. You didn't speak up. You were scared, but you wanted to. That matters. It means you know the difference between right and wrong, even when it costs you something. That's leadership." Her mouth fell slightly open. She placed a hand against her chest. "Me?" she whispered. "Yes, you," Keanu affirmed. "You will lead this committee. Your role will be to remind us that every person deserves respect. You'll help design training, oversee how customers are treated, and ensure our staff reflects the values we've chosen." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. She nodded, unable to find words at first. Finally, she whispered, "I won't let you down." "I know," Keanu replied with a small smile. The staff erupted in murmurs. Some were shocked, others relieved. A few even smiled in genuine approval. It was a turning point. Keanu straightened. "This transformation won't be easy. Some of you may resist. Some of you may feel it's not your place to change. But let me tell you this. Every person matters. Every hand that folds a garment, every voice that greets a guest, every glance that either lifts someone or tears them down. That is what true luxury will mean here." Patricia, still seated in the back, felt pride swell in her chest. She remembered all the years when her son was just a boy with big dreams, promising that one day he'd make sure she was never treated as less than anyone else. Now, she saw him keeping that promise, not just for her, but for countless others. The meeting ended not with applause, but with something more powerful: reflection. The employees rose slowly, leaving with new thoughts weighing on them. Fear still clung to some, but hope flickered too. Change had begun. The morning air in Paris carried a brightness that seemed almost orchestrated. After days of heavy skies and drizzle, the sun broke through, casting golden light across the Avenue Montaigne. Outside the boutique, a red ribbon stretched across the entrance, gleaming in the sunlight. Crowds had already gathered. Journalists with cameras, fashion insiders, curious Parisians, and invited guests from every walk of life. The storefront, once a fortress of polished glass and silent judgment, now seemed alive. The floral arrangements by the doors weren't ostentatious displays of wealth, but warm, welcoming bursts of color. Inside, the chandeliers glittered, ready to bathe the reopening in light. Outside, a hush fell as Patricia Reeves approached the ribbon. Keanu walked beside her, steady and calm, though his presence alone drew the gaze of every lens. He had insisted that this was not his moment, but hers. Patricia, dressed in a simple but elegant blue dress, carried herself with quiet grace. She looked at the ribbon and then at the door. The very door that had once been shut in her face. For a moment, the memory tugged at her chest. Then she lifted her chin. Keanu bent toward her slightly, speaking softly. "This is your door, Mom. Today, you open it." Patricia's lips trembled into a small smile. She held the ceremonial scissors, their handles plated in gold. The cameras clicked furiously, but she focused only on her son's face, calm and encouraging. "Ladies and gentlemen," Keanu said, his voice carrying over the crowd, "thank you for being here. Today we're not just opening a boutique, we're opening an idea. That luxury doesn't need walls to keep people out. That beauty belongs to everyone. Applause swelled, rippling through the crowd. Patricia's hand tightened on the scissors. The flashbulbs caught the moment as she cut the ribbon cleanly in one motion. The red fabric fluttered to the ground and the crowd erupted. Cheers, applause, and even shouts of encouragement filled the air. For Patricia, the sound washed over her like a tide. Just days earlier, she had walked away from this door humiliated. Now she stood in front of it, celebrated. Keanu stepped back, gesturing toward the entrance. "After you, Mom," he said firmly. She hesitated only for a second, then walked forward. Vincent, now humbled, stood by the door. His posture was different this time, no arrogance, no sneer. He bowed his head slightly as Patricia approached. "Welcome to the boutique, Mrs. Reeves," he said with sincerity. His voice carried just enough to be heard, not performative but genuine. Patricia's eyes softened. She gave him a gentle nod before stepping through. The symbolism struck everyone watching. A door that had once closed on her now opened first for her, and the man who had once turned her away was the one to hold it open. As Patricia entered, the rest of the guests followed. But it wasn't only the wealthy who walked behind her. Nurses in neat uniforms, firefighters in dress jackets, school teachers in modest clothing. Each carried a special invitation, each walking side by side with celebrities and designers. The contrast was striking, but there was no division. They blended together, moving as one wave into a space reimagined. Inside, the boutique glowed. The polished floors reflected the light from chandeliers, and every corner seemed refreshed. But it wasn't just decor. It was atmosphere. Something intangible hung in the air. Openness, respect, possibility. Patricia stopped just inside, looking around with quiet awe. The same walls that had once echoed with rejection now radiated welcome. She turned slightly, glancing back at Keanu, who gave her the smallest nod. The boutique had reopened, not just its doors, but its meaning. As the guests moved deeper into the store, their eyes took in more than gowns and displays. Near the entrance, a framed plaque stood on a pedestal. It read, "The New Luxury, a tribute to dignity, inclusion, and craftsmanship." Beneath the words was a dedication. To every woman who ever felt unseen, to every man whose uniform speaks more than his wallet, you belong here. People paused to read it, visibly moved. A firefighter brushed a tear from his cheek. A nurse in her late 50s whispered to her daughter, "I never thought I'd be welcome in a place like this." Further inside, the boutique had changed in ways both subtle and striking. Mannequins stood beside photo portraits, not of models, but of real people. A school teacher from Lyon, a sanitation worker from Marseille, a single mother from Toulouse. Each wore custom egletized garments from the store's new community collection. The clothes were elegant, but the message was bolder. Every life had dignity. Keanu walked quietly among the guests, never drawing attention to himself. He greeted people with eye contact, short handshakes, and sincere thanks. He stopped at the portrait of a smiling woman in a red blazer holding two young kids. "She's a janitor at a children's hospital," said Sophia, now head of the Dignity Committee. "She saved for years to buy one outfit for interviews. We asked her what she needed. She said, 'Just something that makes me feel like I matter.'" Keanu nodded slowly. Now she'll never be made to feel small again. The store pulsed with a new energy. Conversations buzzed not about price tags or fabric origins, but about people, where they came from, what they'd endured, and how they'd been invited here tonight. Near a velvet seating area, Patricia sat beside an elderly seamstress named Brigitte. "My daughter's in the back," Brigitte said softly. She helped stitch one of the dresses in the front window. She never thought her work would be displayed in Paris. Patricia smiled. "That's what makes it beautiful. You feel the heart in every stitch." At that moment, a boy no older than 8 tugged on Keanu's sleeve. He wore a tiny blazer and 2 big dress shoes. "My mom says this is the nicest thing anyone's ever done for her," he said. She cried in the car. Keanu crouched down to eye level. Tell your mom she belongs here, and you do too. The boy smiled, then ran off to find her. The boutique no longer belonged to the elite. It belonged to everyone who had once stood outside the velvet rope and believed the world wasn't meant for them. Now, they weren't just welcome, they were the center. And for Patricia, standing quietly near the front, it felt like the circle had finally closed. Equals, 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 equals 14. At first, it was just whispers, a few blurry cell phone shots of Keanu Reeves standing at the top of a glittering staircase. A video clip of his emotional speech began circulating, shared by a Paris fashion blogger who had only intended to film the dazzling guests and high-profit model arrivals. But once Keanu spoke into the microphone, telling the world that his mother had been dismissed for not looking rich enough, the internet lit up like a struck match. By morning, hashtags exploded across platforms. Dignity is luxury, Patricia deserved better, and Keanu redefined style trended globally. Journalists scrambled to confirm the details. Was this true? Did Keanu Reeves really purchase a boutique in Paris because his mother was snubbed? The confirmation came swiftly. Statements from the building's former owners confirmed the sale. Leaked memos from the boutique's staff, shared anonymously, revealed that the training and vision changes were real. Even internal communications showed that community service programs were now being written into staff contracts. The world responded, and not passively. Fashion magazines that usually spent their pages praising overpriced handbags began printing introspective editorials. One headline from Verité Mode read, "Keanu Reeves has reminded us that grace is always in style." Another from GQ International asked, "Is this the end of gatekeeping fashion?" And perhaps the most gripping came from the Parisian Times, which simply read, "The door that wouldn't open." But more powerful than the headlines were the personal stories flooding in from people across the world. A woman from Atlanta posted a photo of herself crying in her car. Her caption read, "I once walked into a bridal boutique wearing jeans and got ignored for 40 minutes. I left and cried in the parking lot. Watching Patricia walk through those doors, I felt like I was walking through them too." A teacher from Mumbai shared, "I've taught in low-income schools for 27 years. Last month I went to buy a gift for my wife and the store clerk asked if I was lost. Today, I saw Keanu say people like me deserve respect. I've never felt so seen." From every continent, people spoke up. Single mothers, factory workers, nurses, disabled veterans, artists, retired bus drivers, children of janitors, widows, librarians. They all had something to say. Not just about being dismissed in stores, but about being overlooked in life. And for once, someone hadn't just spoken for them, he had acted. The boutique's official social media page, which had previously posted sterile runway images and seasonal handbags, transformed overnight. Now it featured portraits of community workers standing in the boutique lobby with flowers in hand, wearing quiet pride and simple clothing. "Dignity looks like this," read one post beneath a photo of a smiling older man in a postal uniform. "He delivered letters for 39 years. Now he's being honored in the very place he was once asked to leave." But not everyone was celebrating. Critics emerged too, especially from rival luxury brands who called the movement a romantic stunt and unsustainable for real business. An anonymous CEO from a major label told a French paper, "This is emotional theater. Selling handbags is not a social program." And yet, even some of their own employees weren't buying it. A former store manager at one of the world's top luxury fashion houses anonymously posted on LinkedIn, "The truth is, many of us in this industry have quietly hated how people are treated. We're told to look customers up and down before we even greet them. I once got scolded for offering water to a man in work boots." What Keanu Reeves did? It's not just bold, it's necessary. Within days, ripples turned into waves. Boutique managers in cities like Milan, Tokyo, and New York began posting photos of their own community collections, inspired directly by Keanu's model. While some were genuine, others seemed like clumsy attempts to capitalize on the moment. One brand posted a photo of a firefighter modeling a $12,000 zero-cents watch, claiming to honor everyday heroes. The comments section erupted with backlash. "This isn't what Keanu meant," one person wrote. "It's not about putting a uniform on a runway. It's about opening your door when someone who doesn't look like you walks in." Still, the core message survived the noise. More powerful than any press campaign were the videos of quiet moments. A young boy escorting his single mother into a Los Angeles boutique, where a sign now read, "All are welcome. Kindness is our dress code." A video from a South African teacher showing a thank you letter she wrote to Keanu, tears in her eyes as she held up a small card that said she was selected for the Community Collection Access Pass. But the most stirring moment came during a live panel on BBC World News. The host asked a guest, a former luxury fashion exec turned consultant, what he thought of Keanu's revolution. He paused for a long moment, then said, "We always knew exclusion was baked into the business. We just never thought a man in a black suit would walk in and pull the curtains open, and that it would take him less than a week." Despite the emotional praise, Keanu himself stayed silent in the media. No interviews, no red carpet follow-ups. When asked by a New York Times reporter for a quote, his assistant replied, "Mr. Reeves has said what he needed to say. The rest is up to the world." That silence only amplified the story. For once, the focus wasn't on a celebrity promoting himself. It was on a son restoring his mother's dignity, and a community reclaiming its place in spaces once designed to keep them out. The final impact came not through a headline, but through action. One by one, cities began hosting dignity pop-ups, traveling fashion events modeled after Keanu's principles, where street vendors, teachers, and social workers were the VIPs. Paris, where it all began, unveiled a mural of Patricia Reeves with the words, "Elegance is kindness," stitched in courage. Beneath it stood a girl in tattered shoes, smiling up at her reflection in the boutique's glass. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was on the outside. And around the world, thousands more were beginning to feel the same. The first letter came on a rainy morning, slipped beneath the door of Patricia's apartment like a secret waiting to be discovered. She opened it slowly, her fingers brushing over the neat handwriting. "Dear Patricia," it began. "My name is Elise, and I'm a single mother of 2 in Lyon. I work as a janitor in a hospital. Last week, I received a voucher from the Community Collection. When I walked into the Paris boutique and was greeted with respect, offered champagne, and shown the new collection, I broke down in tears. No one had ever treated me like I mattered before. Thank you. You changed more than my wardrobe. You changed how I see myself." Patricia folded the letter with trembling hands, pressing it to her chest. The rain tapped gently against the window behind her. She wasn't used to being the center of anyone's gratitude. She had spent her life behind curtains, behind men, behind duty. And now, people were writing to her. By the end of that week, 10 more letters arrived. One was from a retired school teacher in Marseille who had spent 30 years teaching underfunded children with no recognition. Another came from a firefighter who had lost his home but said that standing next to a billionaire in line at the boutique and being treated the same had restored his pride. Some were short notes of thanks. Others were pages long, but every single one carried the same message. "You made me feel seen." She read them all aloud to Keanu one evening, her voice thick with emotion. He said nothing at first. He just reached for her hand and held it quietly. That was his way. But in his eyes was a glimmer of the boy he had once been. The one who used to sit on the floor, listening to her cry behind closed doors, swearing silently that he'd find a way to make the world gentler for her. That promise was no longer silent, it was now echoing across continents. Far from Paris, in cities Patricia had never been to, Madrid, Jakarta, Johannesburg. Similar letters began arriving, not just at her door but at the boutique itself. They were displayed proudly in the staff lounge, pinned on a board Keanu insisted they call the mirror wall. Each story reflected not just gratitude, but transformation. Vincent stood before the board one afternoon, staring at a letter written by a woman in Lisbon. She'd once been escorted out of a luxury store for wearing a supermarket uniform. Now she had just been gifted a scarf from the community collection. And it wasn't the gift that moved her, but the fact that the employee helping her had asked about her day and really listened. Vincent folded his arms, silently absorbing the message. His own transformation hadn't come overnight. Keanu had required him to do 60 hours of community service at a shelter in the 13th arrondissement. At first, Vincent had shown up in his tailored jacket and gloves, expecting to manage donations and move on. But then a boy named Amari had asked him if he knew how to braid hair. His mother was ill, and Amari wanted to look nice for school. Vincent had frozen. That moment, so specific, so human, broke something open. He stayed late that day, and the next. By the end of his service, he had learned how to cook industrial-sized batches of soup, how to fold donated socks to look like gifts, and how to kneel without shame to tie a child's shoes. Now he volunteered every Thursday by choice. He no longer wore gloves. Sophia, too, had stepped into a larger purpose. As the head of the Dignity Committee, she oversaw every hiring decision and every customer experience protocol. But her influence began to ripple beyond the boutique. An editor from a major fashion journal asked to interview her, and her quiet honesty captivated readers. Soon, she was invited to speak at a design summit in Milan on the ethics of beauty. From there, the invitations kept coming. Singapore, Toronto, Cape Town. Each time she stood on stage, she carried the memory of that moment Patricia stood at the door, rejected. This movement began with a door, she told one crowd, and a mother who dared to stand her ground. Patricia watched Sophia's talks online, sometimes with tears in her eyes. She never imagined that a single act of humiliation could become a wave of healing. But here it was. Proof that sometimes the smallest fracture revealed the greatest light. She looked around her modest home, now filled with cards, letters, photos, and news clippings. Keanu didn't want credit. He never did. But what he had sparked was undeniable. The ripple had become a tide. One evening, Patricia sat by the window reading a letter that had arrived from Montana. It was written by a fourth-grade teacher named Elise, who said she had always felt invisible when walking into high-end stores. After seeing the viral video of Keanu's speech, Elise had received a voucher from the community collection and was invited to a boutique in Chicago. "They treated me like royalty," Elise wrote, "not because I was spending money, but because I mattered." Patricia folded the letter slowly and placed it in a box she kept under the coffee table, a box labeled simply "Dignity." She leaned back and closed her eyes. In her memory, she saw a younger Keanu, barely 10 years old, standing beside her after a long shift at the diner. Her feet were sore, her hands red from scrubbing. He had looked up at her then and whispered, "When I grow up, I'll make sure the world sees how strong you are." She hadn't remembered those words for decades, but now they rushed back, full and clear. He had kept his promise, not just for her, but for millions. She smiled to herself, tears gently rising. It wasn't about boutiques or scarves. It wasn't even about redemption. It was about restoring something that too many people had lost. Respect without conditions. Recognition without judgment. Love without limit. And in that quiet moment, Patricia knew something sacred had taken root. The kind of movement that didn't just trend, it grew. It lasted. And somewhere, her son, somewhere out in the noise of the world, was still building it, quietly, lovingly, powerfully, just like he always had. The boutique stood bathed in soft golden light, just as it had 1 year ago, but this time with a different spirit. Gone were the velvet ropes that once dictated who was worthy of walking through its doors. In their place was a small sign beside the entrance, elegantly lettered in gold. All are welcome, always. Inside, the boutique buzzed with quiet energy as guests gathered for the anniversary celebration. It wasn't just another fashion event. This one marked something bigger: the triumph of dignity over arrogance. The walls that once echoed with silent judgments now carried laughter, conversation, and purpose. Keanu stood at the back of the boutique, watching. He wore a simple black suit, just like the night he'd first introduced his mother to the world of fashion with the reverence she'd always deserved. But tonight, the occasion wasn't just about Patricia. It was about everyone who'd ever been made to feel small. A large screen on the boutique's side wall flickered to life. It played a short film, beautifully edited, showing the transformation of the boutique over the past year. Clips showed single mothers being fitted for gowns, firefighters browsing the community collection, teachers being treated to spa-style service during their visits. Quiet dignity in every frame. At the end of the film, Keanu stepped forward to address the guests. He didn't stand on a raised platform. Instead, he stayed at eye level, walking slowly through the room as he spoke. "When we reopened this boutique," Keanu began, "it was never just about fashion. It was about a promise. One I made as a boy, watching my mother walk this world with grace, despite doors that shut in her face." His voice was steady, quiet, the kind of voice that made people lean in to listen. Keanu paused, looking across the faces of the crowd. Designers, volunteers, staff, students, and community leaders. Then his eyes found Patricia's, standing near the ribbon-cutting wall where it had all begun. "I watched her teach me strength without raising her voice. She taught me that dignity isn't something you buy. It's something you carry. And sometimes," he said gently, "it's something you have to fight to keep." The room fell silent. Keanu continued, "What we've built here is more than a store. It's a model, a symbol, that you don't have to wear diamonds to be treated like you matter. You don't have to drive a Rolls-Royce to be greeted with a smile. And you should never have to explain why your story deserves respect." He stepped to the side and revealed a new plaque on the boutique wall, covered in soft fabric. As Patricia walked up beside him, Keanu gently lifted the cloth. Etched in gold on the plaque were the words, "The Patricia Project Foundation." A wave of quiet murmurs swept through the crowd. Keanu turned to explain, "The Patricia Project Foundation is launching today, and it won't stop at fashion. We're expanding this idea of dignity-forward spaces to restaurants, schools, hotels, airports, and everywhere people are often judged by the wrong things." Patricia placed her hand gently over her mouth. Her eyes glistened, full of quiet emotion. "We're working with partners across industries to train staff, redesign spaces, and remind companies that true luxury is how you make someone feel when they walk in. Especially those who are used to being overlooked," Keanu said. "If you serve people, then dignity should be your first offering." The applause came, slowly at first, but then swelled into a standing ovation. Patricia didn't speak right away. She stepped to the microphone with humility in her posture. Her voice, though soft, was firm. "I never thought a door shutting in my face would open something so beautiful," Patricia said. "But it did, because my son didn't just stand up for me. He stood up for all of us." She looked around at the crowd, some wealthy, some working class, some in uniforms, some in fashion. All now equals. I used to think maybe I should have dressed nicer that day, worn earrings, brushed my hair differently, but now I know. It was never me that needed to change. It was the world. There was a hush, reverent and deep. Patricia reached out and touched the plaque gently. if this project means anything, it means that no one has to shrink themselves to be worthy. You walk in as you are, and that's enough. She turned to Keanu, her voice breaking just a little. And you kept your promise. Keanu stepped forward and placed his hand gently on her back. He leaned close, speaking just for her, but loud enough for those near the stage to hear. Mom, this was never just for you. It was for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. Those words lingered like a soft breeze. The ceremony ended with a celebration of community. Children from local schools showcasing art inspired by dignity. Community volunteers speaking of how the boutique had helped fund their work. And former skeptics now proudly wearing the brand's community collection pieces. Outside the boutique, reporters gathered. Headlines began pouring in. But inside, something more powerful took place. People talked, not just about clothes, but about experiences. One woman, a middle school teacher, shared how she'd once been asked to leave a luxury store for wearing her classroom lanyard. A man in a mechanic's uniform said he'd brought his daughter to this new boutique for her prom dress, just to prove something to her about worth. A firefighter spoke up. This isn't a boutique anymore, it's a statement. The ripple was undeniable. In that room, and in the rooms across the internet, people were starting to believe again in the power of a story. A small act, a changed heart. And now it's your turn. Have you ever experienced rejection because of how you looked, dressed, or where you came from? Have you ever walked into a place and felt invisible? If you've ever been told, directly or indirectly, that you didn't belong, we want to hear your story. Because your story matters, just like Patricia's did. Share your experience in the comments. Tell us your incredible story. You never know who it might inspire. And if this story touched you, if you believe that kindness should never come second to status, like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and don't forget to subscribe. This isn't just entertainment, it's a movement, one story at a time. Thank you for watching. And remember, the doors that once shut you out may one day open the world for someone else. All because you didn't stop believing in dignity.